Good morning, and thank you to everyone who is joining us today. I hope you are in your comfiest of athleisure wear. This is going to be a really fun session. We are going to talk about accessibility, access, and ethics today. This is the second in our Human First series. And the goal of this is to elevate the conversation around how digital strategies and tactics impact real human lives, and to highlight and proudly tote the value of not only inclusion in so many ways, but of building human first to humans, to your business. It's just this great symbiosis. And we want to foster culture, brainstorm more on that one. So as we kick it off, we are talking ethics. It felt important for us to clearly state our ethics in coming to these sessions, to being human first. Number one, we believe that we all want to make good things. There is no one on your team who is out there to sabotage it. We do the best we can with what we have, which brings me to number two. We believe that when we learn better, we do better. We believe it's okay to not have all of the answers. We're not going to. And there are plenty of places where you can point to a flaw in us, but that is not our goal here today. Our goal today is to ask better questions. And finally, the only requirement you need to be part of this conversation is to be a human. And with that, let's go ahead and meet our humans today. Our guest of honor is Jess Peck. Jess, tell me all about yourself. And I would love to hear the story of when you realized that accessibility was something you wanted to fight for.
So I'm currently a machine learning engineer at a local SEO guide, but I do a lot of web development stuff as my hobby, I guess, and I have a couple of like key moments, like in documentaries or like in cheesy documentaries, they'll be like, and this person saw a sunflower and that gave them the seed idea to make a sunflower company or whatever. Like I have these root moments of like, this is why I think accessibility kind of stuck with me. One is my youngest sister was born with a benign tumor on one eye. So she always had one eye that just doesn't work well. And when she was like 1.5, her doctor was like, okay, we're going to cover your good eye to encourage your bad eye to like work. And it did help her in the long term, but in the short term, she just couldn't see for shit. She couldn't see anything. Oh, am I allowed to swear? Yeah. Should have checked that first. Okay, cool.
Jamie and I are hosts. It's all safe.
Okay, here. I like to check. So, she couldn't see anything. So, and I just got this like first-hand experience of watching my like baby sister walk into stuff because it wasn't like labeled in a way that she could see. She was, like she just experienced the world in a way that was very difficult for her. And like the other moment was I had a friend in high school who used a wheelchair and she had a special dispensation to be late for classes because to get up and down the stairs, she had to leave the building, go around the back, take a ramp, and like go all the way back through the building. And so if she had a class on the second floor, she had to leave and come back. So she was just she had to be late all the time. She couldn't be on time. And I just remember being like, well, I mean, she can get upstairs, but she's missing like 20 minutes between each class because she has to literally leave. And this is legal, but it's not making her life easier. She's
covering double the distance, going outside for it and missing out on part of her education. And that was considered to be good enough.
Yeah, exactly. So those are my real world examples, and then just like experiencing life on the web. The web is like the most fundamental part of most people's day-to-day lives, and most of it isn't accessible to people, like a lot of people. Anyway, that was rambly.
No, it was beautiful.
Um,
And our next human up is actually Berman Hale. She is the VP of the Pro Services team over here at Deepcrawl. I'm going to flex her credentials because I love her and because she's my boss. Tell me, Ashley, tell
I
me
hope
about
those two
you
are
and
not-
what makes you love it.
I hope those two are not reliant upon each other.
Absolutely not.
And I'm the clumsiest human here, but I always stay clumsy with really good intentions. So I think for me, it was when I was like 12 or 13, started getting online. And there was this moment where you realized before I was going to libraries and looking up shit and Dewey Decimal cards to finish projects. And then suddenly one person could publish something and it became accessible to, I'm going to air quote, the world. That was a really fantastic idea to me. And then fast forward, I don't know, 5, 8 years later, when I realized that that was a very rosy view. And there are some of the world's most amazing information and resources are not available to a lot of people for a lot of reasons. So that's where I took like the excitement to like, oh shit, we have to do better. Like we absolutely have to do better. So that was one of those core moments for me. And also, like, I hate to bring it down to like, well, I have wives and daughters too, those kind of arguments. But once I found out that I have a genetic mutation that's very strongly associated with Parkinson's, that opened my mind up to accessibility, not just being visual impairment, but understanding that that could be now with the knowledge of people not being able to access data, like cost of data, speed of data, neurological, physical, like auditory, with so much that we do speaking. So I think that just gave me a little bit more momentum. And you see these stats and they're incredible, right? You see these stats and maybe you don't see folks around you struggling with disabilities because a lot of them are invisible or accessibility issues, but related, try to make things a little bit topical here, but I think you all know what's going on in the US with Roe versus Wade and being able to see data like 1 in 4 women will choose to have an abortion in their lifetime. It's similar with disabilities when you go and look at between 1 in 3 and 1 in 5 people have something that will make access to the internet even harder. These are really powerful data points. So next time you're in a room, stop and look around. And that's why I want us to do better. I rambled too.
It. I love it. So for me, accessibility was pretty prevalent. I had family members with disabilities growing up my entire life. And I am where I am at because I was suddenly given access to the internet. And my grandpa won the lottery. He literally won like $800 in 1997. He bought me a desktop PC. And the things I would sit around and learn ended up being more valuable than my college degree because that information was available to me. It all clicked together, particularly the power that we have in digital. When I was at Google I/O and was watching a fantastic neuroscientist named Dr. Eagleman give a great talk. And in that talk, he was telling us how our body makes sense of patterns and frequencies around us. It responds to the input and interprets it in our brain. So we don't necessarily need to go the traditional route. Perhaps if you are deaf, if there was another way to capture frequencies and translate them, your body would figure it out. You would intuitively begin to understand the difference of a speaker here versus a speaker here when they were calculated to pick up different frequencies. And as he's telling the story, he starts unbuttoning his shirt and he's wearing a vest that is designed with speakers that will vibrate depending on the frequencies in the room to assemble together and make what you and I hear. This is a collection of frequencies. And he's showing this vest, and then he shows a picture of the most beautiful 18-month-old baby girl who was born blind, deaf, and mute. And they provided this vest to her because the alternative is a cochlear implant, which is about $500,000. This vest was made for about $500,000. The sweet baby angel, using the vest, was able to hear what was around her and respond. And I saw in that moment the power we have with digital to connect brilliant minds that are trapped beyond artificial walls we put up, not with malice, but with carelessness. Or just not enough budget. We'll talk about all those things. Let's talk about the business ROI and how you're going to segue these conversations to your stakeholders, to your C-levels. Let's go ahead and look at the state of our lives. We've been 3 years now in a pandemic. Our lives are digital. registering for your first vaccine, digital, getting your groceries, digital, everything you needed during this pandemic was absolutely digital. And we've seen industries adapt. So if you're an e-commerce site out there, your interaction, your average share of customer interactions that are digital, no longer popping into a store, checking something out, they have risen 19% in the States year over year. This is all pandemic led. And let me be slightly prophetic for a moment. We're not going to go backwards on this one. We see that 60% of products and services available in North America right now are fully or partially digitized. There is no going back. We are digital by default. Let's look at then, knowing we are all dependent, every single one of us, on this digital world, the state of accessibility within it. If you are at all familiar with Google's Lighthouse tool, then you know it has an accessibility audit built in it. If you're familiar with Web Almanac, you know that they do a massive crawl across the internet to establish how people are doing. So in 2022, our median Lighthouse score was 82%. It actually had slipped, which is a bit of a bummer. Because there's 4 areas that are considered in this audit. Let's quickly talk about them. We're looking for vision, motor and dexterity, auditory and cognitive impairments that would prohibit someone from interacting fully with a page, with its content. They tend to be broken down into things like ease of reading, the ability to navigate, can you input content in forms, how you can perceive and interact with media on the web, supportive assistive technology, ARIA, and overlays for accessibility. Then there's the real world. So that Lighthouse audit gave you these 4 key areas and a series of things to give you a number that's pretty good to show stakeholders. In the real life though, you probably experience accessibility needs without realizing it. Do you have full hands? Are you in bright sun and it's pretty hard to use that screen? What if there's no Wi-Fi and the thing you're trying to load that's a real beefy page? Or most simply, what if you have a headache? There's a lot of folks out here who have menstrual health issues. 1 in 3 persons who can experience a period will have a disability associated with it. A lot of those include headaches. They include not being able to look at your screen because the lights hurt you. Everyday humans, you benefit from this too. There is a boon to be had for all of us. When we look at how we present our content, do we have equity inclusion considered in the foundation? When we have a form, how do we approach pronouns, names, ethnicities, extraneous fields? Yeah, some forms out there on the internet are wild. I get questions asked. Yeah.
They put marital status on so many forms where that's not important, right? Where they offer pronouns or addressing that doesn't fit most people. Like I have a kid that's gender neutral. There are very few forms that will consider that and require them to pick a gender. And there seems to be a confusion between gender and sex. And Jess and I were talking before this. Jess, will you explain the name one? Because you brought up some stuff that I was like, smack, did not know. Love it.
A lot of forms that developers will build are by default thinking about names as a construct in a very Western way. So there are lots of forms online that may be built into your site that do not accept 2-letter names as valid. And if you're a Chinese person, there are a lot of Chinese names that have like 3 or less letters, and they cannot put their name into these forms because it's invalid. So like the best way to deal with names is to just have like a name field, because the way we think about first name, last name is very like Americanized, Westernized. And you're stopping people from using your site. You're like getting in the way of people being able to like buy stuff from you.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. I have 2 last names spaced, no hyphen, and it's so fucking simple, and I break so many different systems. There's also an amazing Radio Lab episode where they talk about someone whose last name was Null, and how many things they broke. Do y'all remember Y2K? Like thinking that the entire internet and world would fail because we didn't know how to handle double zeros. So the fact that it's this fragile, these types of forms and thinking when something's built from the ground up is I don't know, it's bewildering. I also added images and languages on here because a lot of people speak in ways that are different from your customers. Don't use the word utilize if you're a B2C. Use the word use. Like it's fine. Talk casual. There's this really,
But for
like,
must I utilize for soup?
put all the extra syllables in it. But authenticity is a really beautiful thing, even in B2B. Like we're all humans, like everything's built by humans. Humans sign the checks. And when you have language that echoes the audience that you're going after and images of people in your community or in your buyer thing, like that sort of inclusion, that builds a safety. I don't want to understate that, just because like when I feel represented online, it does build this psychological safety where I suddenly have that loyalty to come back. I want to recommend it to others. I mean, you can tie that into business stuff, but even just for existing online in a digital world, it's nice to feel not only safe, and then that really builds into empowerment.
I mean, I feel like sometimes businesses kind of get caught up in seeming intelligent and well-informed, even if that puts up an accessibility barrier to the people that they're trying to attract to their business. Like you can use
Like hark, I went to Harvard.
But like even like if you think about SEO, like how much SEO slang and like inside language do you use when you write about SEO? And if you are trying to sell to a non-SEO audience, or even trying to like explain stuff to a non-SEO audience, like my mom doesn't know what a head tag is. Like I tried to explain meta tags to my girlfriend once and she left the room. Like
I can respect that, and I don't want to force them to have to learn SEO because we are so extra. But let's maybe pivot and talk about how we can learn to relate. If you are in a place of privilege where you do not encounter any of these accessibility issues, one of the quickest paths through to empathy is to be hands-on. So how can we challenge folks? Or if you are already in-house and you have been fighting the good fight, how can you challenge the leadership that doesn't think it needs to be prioritized?
I mean, I'm gonna just say, like, I think incorporating some basic accessibility checks into your SEO audit is a really good place to start, right? Like there are free screen readers. You can try looking at your site without JavaScript and seeing, because there are still some accessibility stuff that comes up that doesn't use JavaScript. You can emulate color vision deficiencies, right? And then no click Wednesdays. Stop yourself from being able to click on your website and just use a keyboard instead, right? Like
there's an NPM library available where it will go out and turn off your mouse on Wednesdays. So the team will collectively then be usability testing, accessibility testing. I have a challenge to our lovely folks out there. We're going to share out links and resources. I've got one I'll share out to you for Google Chrome's screen reader extension. And I would love for you to pull up your most accessible page, the one that got a good score in Lighthouse. I want you to put in your headphones, turn on the camera, start recording, and I want you to sit through that entire page. I dare you. Because once you experience what it's like to have that screen reader ramble off your beautifully optimized alt text, you might have a new perspective on it.
You might think differently about mega menus. And people wanting to put all of the things and links on top of a page on every page. Because
please tweet me your videos of you listening to your pages, please.
But we'll use that rage for good, right? I know it's frustrating, but these videos are good. They help us all do it. I love it.
I think they're all going to be us collectively laughing and going, okay. Yeah, I thought I understood. And now now this is a whole new world. Let's talk about going beyond the I as a human, I'm going to experience what some of these are like, to how do we look under the hood of our code and perhaps move somewhere where we can do automated smoke and sanity checks that include accessibility.
Jess, you added the first two. Before I let you jump in, I'm going to say, like, I put the Deepcrawl set on here, quite frankly, because I feel like it's important to hold a mirror up to what we're doing. And we are not perfect. And there's a huge initiative internally in resources and funding around relaunching site stuff with accessibility first. But I also know that you can't do anything perfectly. So while it's important to turn a mirror to it, I also think that in the spirit of all of us pulling each other up, like, don't be too hard on anyone for an imperfect score, but let's keep working on it together. 45 errors to me is unacceptable. 10 might be while we step up to get there. So at least let's chip away at that number. But I do like using Wave just for a one-page test. It's not super scalable unless you're using their API, but it's kind of nice to see your site and see where your errors are. It's a very good visual representation for those who feel like accessibility is too technical.
And it's folks like the Deepcrawl team and like you in-house who've been trying to pick this fight. I won't call it a fight. You've been advocating for meaningful change. Rabble rousing and continuing to push leads to initiatives like a focus in the redesign, putting money behind it to be sure that we are including everyone. Good job, you. We are your allies. We are here to pick that fight too. Jess, do you want to tell us about Ally CSS or Axe Dev Tools?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I want to say about all of these is automated testing will only ever take you so far because so much is just in the way your
That's
code
a great point.
like interact with itself. Like, I mean, you know, we're mostly SEOs in this audience, I assume. Like, we wouldn't say a Lighthouse test is the end all be all, or even like a technical audit with any of the wonderful SEO tools we have. That's not all there is in SEO, and it's the same with accessibility. Like, the real test is, do people who have different ways of accessing your site, can they access it? But that having been said, ally.css pulls out certain accessibility issues. It's like a CSS flag for possible risks and mistakes that exist in your HTML code. Also, it's apparently pronounced Alex. I wrote that down, but then forgot about it. And there is also a web extension that just uses CSS to highlight mistakes. And then Axe Dev Tools is very similar to Wave. Like, it's just accessibility. You can add it to your Dev Tools toolkit. And if you're doing a website audit, take a look with that. And if you see stuff that's glaring, maybe it's time to warn your client, right?
They have an API that's free. Go use it. We've used it with some Deepcrawl projects as we build out our own capabilities, but hell yeah, to people making testing free and available. Wow, you're making the world better.
Love the open source community. And I love how just you highlighted that you can't really do everything with automation, because if there were ever an intersection of human first and technology, it is advocacy for accessibility. It falls in the I can't put a dollar sign on it, so therefore it's not going to get moved category far too often, which is why we are about to talk ADA compliance. And this right here is the screenshot that you're going to forward to that boss when they say there isn't room or budget. Because this is the one that will get their attention. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm simply saying that when you threaten, or not when you threaten, when you show that there were more than 10 ADA digital lawsuits a day in 2011, perhaps that gets attention. And it's not as though you're one and done. Many of those suits filed, multiple against the same companies.
I mean, if Beyonce can get hit, we can all get hit. because her site had a lawsuit. I always say like we should do good for people. If not that, we should do good because people who are disabled or have impairments have money to spend. Also, do it because businesses want to minimize legal risk. So if you can't appeal to the human or the financial side, go straight to, do y'all want to get sued? Because I want to help you not get sued.
We're SEOs, we pivot, we adapt.
Yes. Please let us stay here. That's a good point for potential lawsuits. Well, yeah.
And it's worthwhile to note that 74% of the 2021 citations were against e-commerce sites. If that is your niche in your industry and you have a beloved tome of a mega menu, this could be a good cause to go ahead and look a little bit further into this. And it's not just big money by any means. We saw, I think, around 30% of sites in these were under $50 million in revenue. So don't think because you're not Amazon and you're copying what Amazon does that you will not also get Amazon sued. All right, so next up is one of my passion topics, and this is translation and ethics. The internet has gotten better, and we've seen some really great initiatives to increase the availability of content to users in their native languages. But to this day, the lion's share is going to content that is in English. And if we juxtapose that against the actual representation of languages spoken, there is a large gap here. And this is particularly important to me because as our lives are digital, a lot of times you are asked for consent or you are agreeing to terms when you use a site. Can you truly do that when it's not represented in your language? There is fantastic work by Translators Without Borders and a couple of other NGOs looking at information available to refugees being primarily in English and non-English speaking areas. There was a medical group in Africa who was doing testing and having folks sign all these forms in English. The website for the native population was in English. So how can users consent and meaningfully engage when it's not presented to them in their language? And I would actually even argue, if you look at the idea of linguistics, of if we don't have a word for something in our language, then we don't adopt that thing, that technology. When we don't publish content in these languages, we force those who want to learn to move to another language, most likely English. And we are constricting the flow of new information and ideas into a culture. From a linguistic sociology standpoint, there's a lot of value to be had. From a strictly human standpoint, don't kill off stories that are so beautiful just because you don't want to translate them. And we've seen Google do initiatives where they are actually auto-translating in 5 languages now, content, and I love to see this. Keep an eye on the keyword blog, and it's particularly the Area 120. It's their incubator accelerator group, and there's some fantastic projects coming out of there.
I know I shouldn't raise my hand. I'm a child.
Oh, please do. Yes, you in the front row.
I do like that during the I/O keynote yesterday, Google announced 24 new languages, including some indigenous languages, including Sanskrit, stuff like that, which is great. Just, I don't know, it's the languages, like, what do they say? Together with these 24 new languages, this is 300 million people. More than, and it does include the first indigenous language of the Americas. This is something where it goes beyond just economic viability, but obviously with our imperialism and bullshit, we are erasing cultures at a high speed. So finding ways to preserve that, to preserve the language and make it more accessible even to new people who haven't been exposed is awesome. I love it. So it's good to see that the languages have evolved beyond just here you can buy this to being more aggressive with permissions, because that is a very big thing as well, to then even bringing in new people to new cultures instead of erasing them. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Jamie, when you talked about like forms in different languages, I immigrated to the United States. Like, I went through the immigration process and then the citizenship process, and I went alongside people who were from cultures that were not English speaking, right? And the forms were impenetrable to me as an English speaker. And, you know, I have a ton of privilege. I had a ton of privilege coming from the UK to the US. It made it easy for me, and it was still a massive slog. Still had to study, still had to like go through all this language that was designed to be as difficult as possible. And I just can't help but see parallels with the way we make access to the information on our sites, and also the information you take from people when you are using analytics, and like how tied up that all is in just trying to prevent access to get the best outcome for the site rather than the best outcome for the user.
Exactly. Well, and I think a lot of it is because we prioritize gadgets and gizmos aplenty. It's really easy to get a new feature added in a backlog. It's much harder to address tech debt, particularly page bloat. And if we look at this great data set provided by the Web Almanac, we can see that, yeah, the website, the web keeps getting faster and web pages keep getting more bloated.
That sounds like me, without the faster part. Yeah. It's funny because like I love JavaScript in a lot of ways. It makes the web all interactive and fun. So from that purpose, great. But then I also am like, I feel pretty guilty in a lot of ways because yes, the cost, right? The cost and accessibility of getting that core info is, we're not doing great with keeping up with the exciting stuff by tacking on making it useful for everyone.
This is from a fantastic site called What Does My Site Cost? This is average cost of loading a page across the world based on their beautiful data sets.
Webpagetest.org, do they use the same data set, or do you know?
Oh, I have no idea. I know this
so.
is What Does My Site Cost?
Yeah.
I think a lot about, there was a story about someone who learned to code on a Nokia like flip phone, like loaded in sites on a Nokia flip phone, and then didn't have enough data to like keep the site up, so would write down all the practice problems and like code on a piece of paper and then upload them later. And I think about that whenever I see people be like, oh, you know, everyone's got like fast technology nowadays, like I can load in like 90 tons of React into the head of this page, no one cares. And it's like, no, you were preventing.
No, because now we're
people.
layering in financial access. We've moved beyond accessibility to a new hurdle we're asking to overcome.
And even if we have access to these devices, which a lot of people do, right? Like I used to work for a nonprofit in the Caribbean. Yes, access is much greater with devices and smartphones. However, each byte is a hell of a lot more expensive. And so you see people doing things like downloading, or even just space on the phone too. They may download an app to do something because a site forces them to. Crumble cookies, I'm looking at you. I fucking love your cookies. I order them all the time, and now you make me have an app. Tiny thing, tiny. But then they will delete the app because it takes up too much space. Or like this, I think is a really big impetus for a lot of AMP pages. I know they get hate, but having the lightest framework and structure and peeling stuff back at least made those pages more accessible to folks and cheaper. Imagine not being able to access, for instance, like 3 of your top 5 e-commerce sites because of the data throttling or cost. It changes the way that you interact online and the way that you supply the things you need in your day-to-day life. GraphQL is pretty fast.
Our lovely Americans in the audience right now, next time you are traveling just outside of your home, I'm going to dare you to turn off Wi-Fi and try and figure out where your bus is, figure out where the nearest store is. Things you need are only on that limited cellular network. It makes a big impact. So we have accessibility barriers, we have financial barriers, and there is a new one that is growing with a shocking prevalency, and that is skin tone and access. I had to grab a screenshot of this headline because can you imagine having worked so hard in your life to take the bar exam, and when you show up, it will not let you because it can't recognize your dark skin tone. This was real life for a number of students, and this is not an isolated incident. Proctorio was one of the big online proctors during our pandemic, and a student attending a school that used these went, "Why can't I log in?" and began to dig and poke around and start to test. And his foundings came back with 50% of the time, less than, they could recognize a student of darker complexion. And this is why diversity matters so much, because when you have a group of people who all perhaps look the same and you train an AI model based on how they look, it's going to have a much different threshold of efficacy given someone else. Infamously, Timnit Gerbu left Google after speaking out very publicly about facial recognition, its inaccuracies, and sharing how when it is used by law enforcement, particularly during Black Lives Matter protests, it's low accuracy rate. Regardless, they would still use it and start targeting people. This is all deeply concerning and all very real, even if your privilege lets your webcam spot you and add in a bunch of cute filters without a problem.
Yeah, false profiling affected so many people's lives.
Yes, false profiling. I'm glad that it has a name.
It's so messed up. Also, like, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of like Google's initial faux pas with Google image search with black faces. I'm not going to get into it because it makes me sick. It's fucking terrible. And they know, and they owned up to that. But technology is fallible. It's built by humans. And I think a lot of Google's resources, especially early days, was a bunch of white guys programming in Mountain View, California. So I did really like hearing about Google adopting and partnering with the Monk Scale yesterday during the I/O keynote. This is like, it's what gets my engine going, is when I see them partnering with people that are building these huge collaborative projects in a way that can then be applied to technology. This is really cool because it's not just like they're building it into like Pixel phones that do better with selfies, where they recognize hair texture and can build in the depth better. They're changing like the white balance so that Black people or dark people, anyone of color, is seen more, I guess, like more true to themselves and more beautiful. It's not flattening the different colors. This is also going to get into the entire Android ecosystem. I think about image search, Google Lens, multi-search, like just ways of showing this. The AI models are not just a small subset. They're pulling in data from humans all over the world. We know that English-speaking white people are not the majority. Majority. So being able to pull more in there is great. And a lot of this is deemed under the word colorism. I wanted to introduce that to the vocabulary because I think we all talk about this and notice it, but I like this word and how we can use technology to fight colorism, so that even when you are selling makeup or anything like that, you can go in and be like, okay, what are the videos that we have? How are our resources partnered with our data, leaving folks out? So I really look forward to seeing more and more of this. I don't know if I already said this, but they're open sourcing all of the data to this. So put this on your checkbox, put this in ways to talk to your company about it, especially on e-commerce sites who are getting hit with those lawsuits.
I mean,
I love how your fire has lit my fire on this.
I'm pumped.
I mean, it's like Jamie was talking about tech debt, and like the way cameras work and don't work with darker skin is literally tech debt from when cameras were first developed. Like this
What's that you say? Developed around the old white men, you say?
Yeah. Like tech debt can not even just be in the code that we're writing, but like in the systems that have built up to the code we're writing. And the only way to get better at doing it is by acknowledging it and working with people who are affected by it and being like, understanding other people's experiences better, right? Like
It's so impactful.
Yeah.
I mean, the sheer joy that I felt just when Target put out a few like plus size models that looked more like me, like imagine this, but representation for something that you have been biased against your entire life in most systems, right? That have like, it's like you were climbing a mountain, but with weights on your legs, like let's
Yeah.
help start taking weights away. Not all of them. It's much bigger than just this, but
no more technology that goes, oh, we weren't expecting you here. Like no more of that. Let's shut that down. So hopefully everyone out there has got that joy, that fire, because there's so much we can do. There are so many clever minds out there that are very, very crafty. And I look forward to seeing all of this move forward. If you're on one of those teams and you want to move forward, but you're not getting that buy-in from your stakeholders, let's real quick talk about the Boon here. Let's put a $ behind it. This is one of my favorite stats, and I welcome your personal tales and factoids as well. There was a 2019 study done in the UK that showed 69% of people with access needs had to abandon that process. They wanted to give you money. How much money, you ask? Well, that click value is about $17 billion. You can put a zero. You can put a $ on this, a zero, a comma, maybe 2 commas. There is money to be had here.
I mean, everyone's looking at abandoned carts if you're SEOing an e-com site, right? So when you're looking at how many folks don't convert versus clicks and that ratio, have you had the conversation or considered that a portion of those are not converting because of accessibility?
Exactly.
So try to buy the product with Screenword, try to buy the product without JavaScript on or without the mouse and see what happens, because I know y'all are beholden.
Find your uncle's old Nokia, try and load it.
I called it my emotional support Nokia. Sits in my glove box. But yeah, why don't you consider that, since I know a lot of folks have a KPI of trying to improve that actual converting ratio. How much is accessibility holding you back? Monies.
My darling host, tell me your key takeaways. What's the one thing you want someone to walk away from listening to this session with on their mind and ready to action?
This is my new drum I'm going to start banging constantly. I think SEO agencies should hire accessibility experts and just provide accessibility audits with SEO audits. I don't think it should be separate. I don't think SEOs should ask their clients necessarily, do you want an accessibility audit? I think we just need to start assuming that our client sites, our sites are not accessible, and work with the people who can make them most accessible. And I have a ton of people who are really good at accessibility in agencies who you can work with, and I will put it, we have a Twitter thread going. Yeah,
I even want to use those. Deepcrawl's building out accessibility tools within Deepcrawl. However, we know that, like, just because Jamie and I know a lot about accessibility and other people on the team, we need to hire someone who is an accessibility expert who has had their feet on the ground and done this. So yes, even if you have smart people who love it, unless you have the resources to make them an accessibility expert and support that, then you need to hire someone. This is not a side gig. This is not a ampersand at the end of your accessibility audit. And I will say, I know we're 2 minutes over, but I have some time to stay and answer questions, at least 5 minutes. I think we can. And questions in the Twitter thread is fab.
I think we have a little wiggle room to do some Q&As.
Yeah, I didn't say my takeaway yet, though. I just got excited. My takeaway is that, holy bananas, I learn new things every single day about accessibility that either gets me excited or really pissed off. And I hope to keep using that energy to push on the infrastructure of technology, but also within my day job. Whether it's people we hire and how we interview, to how we talk to our executives and prioritize features. And some of that is having those financial figures like you have. But that's my takeaways. There's just so much. And you have to relate to some of this with some people in your life in some way. This is a very, very broad problem. This is a very, very broad opportunity. It's not just visual impairment. So that's my takeaway. And I love you.
Let's open it up. for some Q&A. I just want to end it on this thought. Gregory Mansfield here is a disability advocate. They are in a wheelchair for their life, and they do a fantastic job at humanizing the gap in perception between what we think could be an inconvenience to us versus the barrier created. It is, inaccessibility is a choice. Failure to accommodate is a choice. Exclusion of disabled people is a choice. Let's open the floor up for any questions.
Caleb had one. Any advice on convincing an agency boss that accessibility should be included in the tech audit, and how to convince the client as well? Both will hyper-focus on potential ranking lift or lack thereof, not a potential lawsuit.
Go ahead and go install that no mouse library on their computer. Just ambush them randomly. Turn on the screen reader. Turn on just.
Like, there's a pretty good from a, like, you just gotta like give people the $ perspective. Like, there's a pretty good correlation, which doesn't mean causation. We know that, right? But like, there is a good correlation between making a site accessible and getting a rankings boost, because the fact of the matter is, if your site is accessible to people who are not using
bots don't have eyes and ears, my friend.
Yeah.
So semantic HTML and an ARIA label are pretty useful.
They're very useful to a bot. Bots don't like surf a web page. They surf a web page a lot closer to someone who is using a screen reader might surf a web page. And that's, I don't want to like say that in a way that dehumanizes people who use screen readers. It's just the way that bots and machines that are designed to surf the web, that are not just browsers, those all kind of pass information in a similar way. That was a long rambly answer.
No, but it's valid, because there's very much the altruistic, I want this to happen because people matter, but sometimes to get those code changes made, there are many ways to Oz. And if the way to Oz for you is to leverage the SEO impact of semantic HTML and ARIA labels, then do it. Use that as your leverage, but keep the humans in mind.
I worked on a site which was very image heavy, and we built out like a semantic card system. This wasn't even looking at like alt text. It was specifically, they had focus issues when a user like used tabs to navigate down their pages. And after we implemented these fixes, their rankings lifted. And it was just from like making things more usable, more clickable, and more semantically and data-wise entwined with each other. Also, I think Google should make accessibility like a ranking factor. I think they shouldn't rank accessible sites anymore. This is a completely different thing. This is just me giving advice.
I think they put out AMP pages because we were plugging every page with 5 megs of synchronously loaded JavaScript. Like, if you don't want to have to adopt these terrible Google programs to rank, maybe consider minimizing what you're shipping.
There are some questions about the legal stuff, which I don't think we should answer because we're not lawyers.
Not a lawyer. Respect the question. I encourage you to.
Probably just a riotous socialist here. However, I included one link that's got info on accessibility laws that just in the US. I haven't found a really good resource that talks about accessibility laws worldwide, and they change a lot. So I'll see if I can keep my eye out for that. If anyone can share any for the countries they're in or do business in, because like the first laws in the US were from like 2005 to 2010. So there is a long history there. Unless you two know, I don't know of a resource that pulls in all the worldwide laws for accessibility in the US.
I do not, but there is a Twitter thread that all of us have on our Twitter profiles. We're going to include resources in there, and I deeply welcome your resources, insights, tools. Bring them, add them in there. So maybe at the end of this, we'll have a really good thread that we can unroll and just have resources to share with everyone.
I dig it. Hey, Jamie, thank you for putting together these amazing slides and bringing the 3 of us together to talk about this. And Jess, thank you so much
My
for being here.
heart's so happy.
I know
Thank
it
you
makes me
both.
happy too. Jess, I'm so glad you're here. Also, thank you to my day job employer Deepcrawl for letting us, like, always giving us space to talk about this. I know there are lots of, especially economic pressures, and just being able to make space, like, we think it's important, but for larger organizations to make space for you to talk about it, for you to attend these sorts of webinars and to have discussions, all of that is fantastic. So yes, we want more, but we applaud where we are and we keep pushing.
Absolutely. If you have resources you want to share, you want to join in this conversation, you have an aspect of digital ethics that you want to talk through, you can find me on Twitter. My name is @JammerVaults. Ashley here is @Berman Hale, and Jess is @Jess BP. Did I get it right?
There's a "the" in there, but yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I failed.
I do it to trip people up.
I'm fired. I'm fired.
You did it well. We're going to keep doing these kind of talks about accessibility. Well, not just accessibility, but ethics in general. So if there was anyone in the audience that felt the pull and wants to talk more about ethics in our job, reach out to Jamie or I, because we can keep posting these webinars. We would love to. Write those in the chat. If you wouldn't mind dropping your Twitter handles real quick. And I'm in there twice. Booyah. Fantastic. Okay.
Thank
hope
you
to
so
see you
very
all.
much for gifting us
you.
your time today. I hope to see you back here on another Human First adventure.
Human first. Let's do this.
Yep.
I love you all.